Good morning. It's Chelsea and Britt from your favorite podcast, More People, More Problems. And we're here to have a fun topic today. But before we get into that, we just want to say everything we're going to talk about today, as always, confidential. We're never going to let the secrets out. Maybe we will, but off camera. And we'd love for you to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the podcast, which we really hope you are, because we are having so much fun making it. We want to keep doing this. But today we're going to talk about how to ace an interview. So, Chels, why don't you kick it off with some more context on this?
Perfect. So, how to ace an interview, and I think we're going to have some interesting perspectives on this one, Britt. You coming from the private sector and myself from the public sector or the federal government. I think a lot of people have those questions on how do you put your best foot forward during an interview? And the processes are actually similar, but actually really, really different between private and public, where we have you can be a little bit more outside the box in the private possibly, and you can still have very, very structured interviews. Whereas in the government, there's a very clear formula that you should be following in order to prepare for a government job that you've applied on. So I think that there's a lot we can dig into that. I think some of them are best practice across the board. And then some of them are going to be very particular to the different jobs you're kind of looking for. What do you think, Britt? Like Shopify, what did you all used to
Well, I
do?
was gonna laugh actually because I was like, I don't think I'd get hired at the government because from what I know, it is so structured and um I just don't know if I'm that person. But maybe that's a highlight of like culture fit. Like maybe I wouldn't be the best candidate for the government in general. But no, I agree with what you're saying. I think there's some streamlines across the board. There's things like show up as your best authentic self. So don't when it's so funny because I remember we used to tell people that we like wanted people to show up authentically, and people would come back and be like, so they can show up in sweatpants and like say rude things if that's who they are. And I was like, well, no, we want them to show up as their best version of their authentic self, and we don't have to hire everyone. So that's a piece of it too.
Yeah, don't look like a slob and
Yeah.
don't swear and do all types of things like that. That's not your best self, right?
No, no. But I think the like one that does actually in all fairness and truth is like show up prepared. Whatever interview you're going to, there's preparation involved. And there's not this assumption that I can just show up and wow someone without doing like the research. And so in the private sector, so from my perspective, it's a lot of like go on, use the product, use the service if it's a service company, like get used to it, have some experience so that when you come into the interview, you not only have a representation of yourself and what you can bring to the table, but you have strong opinions on the actual organization you're joining. And you want to repeat like the words that are used. You want to mimic that so that the person in front of you is like, oh, you understand this environment. You're a great fit for this environment. And I feel like that's probably pretty similar to the government that you want people to prepare. Don't just be lazy.
Like preparation is going to be like the key to everything. And I remember any interviews I've ever done, whether they're private or public before I hit the government, like hours and hours I would put in. And might some people might think that that's too much, but you should know a lot about the culture of the company you're preparing for, whether it's in government or not in government. In government, if you're looking at culture, if you're already in the government or even outside, you have access to the Public Service Employment Survey, which essentially ranks every government department on a various scale based on employee answers to a standardized questionnaire. So I would be looking at that, looking at
Mm,
results. Also, it's you're interviewing them too. So you're like, wow, this person's the lowest of everybody of like 40 departments. Like,
run,
yeah,
run.
I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. So like there's things like that. You should be reading their website. You should understand their vision, their mandates, their priorities for the year ahead, and you should understand that lingo and you should be able to regurgitate some of that back naturally, not like just like spewing off like the vision, blah, 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 like a robot. Like that's not going to be the way to do it. But they need to know that you know what's
Yeah.
going on.
So you make me realize, okay, number one, acquire as much information as you can get your hands on before actually even writing in your application. So we're jumping into the interview, but I actually think we should take a step back and say, okay, let's walk through this process together. You come across a company, an organization that you're really excited, you want a job there. You start looking through all the job postings. Like, tip number one, don't go applying to jobs that don't relate to your skill set. Like, you're just not going to get a call back. Like, there can be a stretch. And I actually always encourage women to stretch further because, generally speaking, this is a stereotype, but men will stretch further for a role and be like, I could do that. And women are like, no, that's not perfectly fitted for me. So I shouldn't apply. So it's like, stretch, just
Which
don't
is fun.
stretch too far. Know your realm, know your skill set, know your experience. And so find the right roles, and then, like we said, research the shit out of it. Like, get to know the organization, get to know the role, and then it's like apply. And so I would say an application, for example, at Shopify, I used to always say, like, create a Shopify store and apply with that. Show that you put a little effort in and show that you're willing to do something more unique than just here's a cover letter that regurgitates the role and says, hi, I'm Brittany. It's like we see thousands of those. Like, what's going to make you stand out and what's going to show us that you care enough? So, me, that was like effort. Figure out a creative way to add effort while still displaying your knowledge and experience, based on your research. Would you say it's the same in the government?
No, no, no,
Oh,
complete opposite. Well, just because they're, obviously you have people applying onto selection processes and you'll have thousands of people applying. Not that that's not necessarily the case with Shopify. But they're screening applications based on a
yeah.
certain level of experience, and it's very in a box type situation. In interviews, it's a very methodical, very structured process, right? So they're screening various competencies. So first off, you need to know what the heck those competencies are, and they're core competencies, right?
Give
So
me an
you can,
example of one. Like, how
like,
would you find it? What it
taking
would look like?
initiative. Taking initiative. So there's a definition for taking initiative. So you should probably understand what that is, and you should probably make mock questions. And so this gets me into a million different things. But interviews in the government, they're either going to be behavioral questions, so what you've done before in the past. So you'll need to have examples of those, or they can be situational questions, what you might do in the future if you were in this role, or if you're doing this, and that. So you need to understand the types of questions you could be asked. You need to create examples of things you've done in the past or things you might do in the future based on that competency. So if I'm trying to assess someone in the interview, and you'll always know what you're being assessed on, like, it's super clear. So you might be being assessed on a various experience criterion, maybe two different experience criterions, and then you'll have a handful of core competencies that you'll be assessed on. So probably maybe initiative, maybe judgment, maybe results oriented, and maybe like one or two other ones. You should know the definitions. Ideally, you should be able to look up a lot of these definitions if you're already in the federal public service with your current organization. Get them from HR, or you'll find them on your
It
intranet.
So much of this sounds like, especially in the government, which is very, very, very different than the private sector, but is that, like, if you do the research and the homework and you're prepared, like, it should be a gimme. Like, how could it not? Like, if it's so structured and so readily available, like, where does the subjectivity come into place? Because it's very, very, very objective, which makes sense because it helps with, you know, like inherent biases. It helps with so many things. I get that, but it comes with some flaws because you're not able to, I guess in my opinion, you're not able to like get into the nuance and almost like, this sounds so weird, but like surprise someone with something and be like, how are you going to react? Like, I always think about interviewing as having a conversation and getting to know someone to not understand necessarily what they know in this moment, but what they're able to think on their feet, how they would react, how they're going to show up every day and evolve. And so, with such an objective set, do you still get that out of them?
So you can, if you're like thinking about a particular competency, right? Like someone who adapts to change easily. So like change management, but you're assessing someone based on a very specific criterion, like on a grid, on an assessment scale, and you're grading them between 1 and 5, for example, on their answers. So you have very particular criterion that is going to box someone based on their answer they're giving you. For example, in the government, if you're interviewing someone based on like two or three different experiences plus a couple of core competencies, say you just throw in a question at the end of like, so do you think you're ready for like this management role? And they give you an answer, and it clearly like looks like they're not ready, and they say something horrendous.
Like it
You're not
contradicts with all the
you're not
prepared
screening
answers.
on that. Like you're not screening on that. So you need to ignore that. I'm not saying that that's not going to
That's
impact.
wild.
It's not going to impact people in terms of their subjectivity. And ideally, you're not bringing any biases in the mix that are going to put a barrier up for that individual. But you're not screening on that. And I get this all the time when we're reviewing references, and I'm jumping ahead, but you can add in different supplementary questions for more information, but you're not screening on that. So you can't justify if you've screened someone out based on an answer to a question that wasn't clearly outlined in the job advertisement
That's
or in the invitation.
That's
Isn't that
such
funny?
bullshit though, in the sense that like humans don't work that way. Like if you ask a question and information comes into play that clearly contradicts, like, yes, I should hire them. It's like, no, it's evident I don't. Came out that I reference check, or even in the interview questions that maybe they're a sociopath. You're like, oh, can't put that into play because like that's just like
You
that's
know,
so
it's
wild to me.
it's odd, but I will say if there's things that are happening that contradict the department's values and ethics, code of conduct type stuff,
So that's an
obviously
out.
these are things that can be taken into
Okay.
consideration. Integrity and respect are our core competency. I could probably look at that, and even if I'm assessing it based on a various like experience or whatever, I could still likely look at that in the context of the entire interview and go like, the person just called me an asshole. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think you've got some flexibility for certain things, but you're still very boxed in, right? So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's getting into the
It's
assessment.
it's honestly the complete opposite to my experience in the private sector and my, I guess, opinions about hiring and how to show up, which is I'll just talk about like the interviews. So the similarity is we're going to ask behavioral based questions. We're going to ask situation based questions because it allows us to understand how people think through, but we're never going to give them the questions we're going to ask. We're never going to give them the evaluation structure of what we're going to evaluate them on because it's like it's a cheat code. Like you know exactly. We want to actually catch them a little off guard to see what their truthful answer in the moment is. And I would say there's a lot more subjectivity. So, meaning we always do, an interview panel of people. So there's never one person making a decision because I think that is just
And they shouldn't
prime
be.
for, yeah, for many terrible things. But with that um, interview panel, sorry, there's a lot of people making subjective and objective decisions, but there is a whole lot of subjectivity in there. Meaning, I truthfully want to know how Joe over here thought of Chelsea interviewing. I want to know like all the nuances of it. And when we get into a discussion, it's always a discussion around table to debrief the whole process. It's always moderated by someone within talent that's able to catch certain biases that play in. Like you can't just, I didn't like Joe or I didn't like Chelsea. It's like, well, it's not about liking. Like, do you think they can do the job? What are the strengths they brought to the table? How did they talk through, how they would solve this really hard problem? Does that align with how we would think we would do it? Are they going to bring value to the team? But we will talk through all those like nuances of it and come up with a decision that has some structure to it, but isn't as rigid as the government. And I think there's beauty in that. Like, I think there's so much extra value
I
that
mean,
comes through that.
I completely agree. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard to stay within a very confined process where you're
Yeah.
assessing. So the fact of the matter is so when we're assessing, when we're screening people in an interview, for example, we're looking at their experiences, their core competencies. They either meet or they do not meet, right? So they either then go possibly into a pool of qualified candidates or partially qualified candidates based on other requirements that might be outstanding. And then it's up to the hiring manager to determine, because there may be several hiring managers. This may be a pool that's going to
Yeah.
be created for many people to hire from. Then it's up to the manager to determine right fit for their particular position. Is it for that specific job that was posted for? Maybe it's another manager who needs to pull from this pool. Like the shitty thing is about it for me is what if that person's a right fit for no one? Like that's awkward, you
So
know?
they just
So
sit in
like
a pool.
how can you qualify people that you know for sure are
Yeah.
not like possibly don't meet the values and ethics of the organization, but it hasn't been demonstrated maybe within an application or within an interview or within references. And that can happen to anyone, like in public, private. You can hire some duds like that have
Yeah.
really made their way through. We are all not perfect in our
Yeah.
hiring decisions, and I can admit to that. But like it would be shit when you get a pool of qualified candidates and maybe there's been a flaw in your screening process. Maybe there's been a flaw like in interviews and certain things haven't been caught. And then you've got everyone who's kind of been pulled for jobs except maybe 10% of the people, like no one wants them. Like, how the fuck did they make it in there? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then that
Yeah.
sucks for them because they're like, well, I'm qualified and like I should be getting a job and whatever. But then everyone's like, oh, that's all, like those are the people that are left. Like, what do I do with that? Like, I have to justify not going with them. It's not their fault. It's not the person's fault. It's the hiring, the board's fault.
It's the process.
It's the process slash sometimes it's the board. If it's the
Yeah.
interview that should have screened folks out based on, and that's why we need to be also super mindful of biases and
Yeah.
whatnot that are happening in those interviews. Because if we're not, you can get people who want to hire someone whom they know and they want to make sure they make it through
Good
that
old
process.
network.
And they might not be the best fit for the organization, or they might not even be qualified. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I expect you could probably get that same type of scenario in private too.
Oh, anywhere. Because I think, okay. So one thing I would just want to say is we're moving a lot to the process side, whereas I think it might be valuable for people. It's like, what are our tips to you showing up? So I think we got to like flip the script a little. But I will say before we do that, that just, I lost my train of thought. Let's get right into
Okay,
the flip of the side.
let's do a couple of top tips.
Yeah.
And
So
I
we already
also
talked about one, do your research
do your
and
research.
really pull in that insight when you do an application.
Pull in that insight, like, and I mean like really prepare. Like, all the things we said, mock questions. You, if you're not going to get questions in advance of the interview, which like you're saying the
You'll
private,
never in the
you
private.
didn't in Shopify, you didn't necessarily in the public, although it could be fairly clear the type of question you might get based on the competency that's outlined, or you might get half an hour before an interview to actually review the questions and jot down some notes. Regardless, you need to have your shit tight. Like you need to know what you've done in the past, what you can flaunt during this interview. And then you also need to have like examples that are adaptable from past to future, whatever the case may be. Like so important.
Yeah,
No,
and I would even say, like, it sounds like it's easier to find the information in the government because there's more structure, etc. But even in private, like go on Reddit. There's so many different sources
I
if you're
mean,
creative to do research to understand it. I think so tip one is do research. Tip two is like embed that insights into all aspects. Don't make it like recorded like a robot, but make it truthfully
natural.
your own. I think that you mentioned something earlier which is so true and valuable, is that so many companies are using different tools to like machine learning, just different things to pull out the right applicants. And so for that to happen though, they
You need
look
to
for
hit.
similarities. So
Yep.
like use the language, use examples that seem ripe for the organization that you're going to bring in.
Okay. So tip three. Um, did we say look presentable?
No, we didn't yet, but I mean,
In this new discussion, look presentable, and I'll make you laugh with something like that. Presentable, obviously you shouldn't be disheveled, shouldn't be showing up in your sweats. I have a psychology background, and you know how most people look up like what's the color I should wear for a job interview, and everyone thinks it's like red, for
I've
example, because
never done that.
have you never done that? So I used to do that all the time. And everyone thinks it's red, and it's not because that's a very aggressive color. This shirt, funny enough, this is the shirt that I wore in my interview for my EX1 position because I looked at like purple is a very calming, soothing color. And so it's like a little bit more zen. And I need a little bit of zen once in a while because I get a little bit ratcheted up. So I'm like, okay, what is my color palette I should stick with? I always look that up, but I'm just lumping that in with the look presentable. It could be total garbage, but I was like, go with a calming color that like puts people at ease. So I was like, that's what I did.
You know what's so funny? You just reminded me I had this HR coach back in the day. I think I mentioned her earlier, but she was amazing. And I would get so nervous before presenting or even interviewing, I guess, prior to that. And she said, wear something underneath your intimates that make you feel like a rock star. And so she's like, put your best bra and panties on, like, let's go. And it sounded so funny, but the truth of it was
Confidence.
do some things that really amp you up and build your confidence before you show up. So I think like get the exterior right, like you said, figure out what the right outfit is, if it's purple, if it's something calming, and also like do what's needed underneath, internally underneath,
Why
that's going to
not?
make you feel good and feel like you can show up and rock it. Because I
So
think
like
confidence is a huge thing.
look great, feel great. Don't look
Yeah,
like a hoe. Like, let's just put that out there. Like, I'm just saying, like, am I allowed to say that? But
I
just
think
so
so.
don't be like overly, you shouldn't
Yeah.
have your
Yeah.
boobs hanging out or like a short skirt. But let's just go there. Do you have tip number 4 on you, Britt?
I mean, I have so many thoughts on tips. So we said a few there. Last was show up and like be representable. I'd say tip number 4 would be like show up ready to interview them as much as they are interviewing you. Because I really think that so many times the person coming in to interview is like, I just need approval. I need them to like me. I really want this job.
Yeah.
All valid. But I think it's like, what is your fit? What do you need out of this relationship? And as the interviewer, the people that show up ready to be like, I'm valued. I would be a great asset to your organization. I will show you how I'm going to bring it to the table, but I want you to show me how this role is going to bring it for me. Oh, I want them more. And I love that they're curious and I love that they come in with confidence.
And okay, so you just hit on so many things for me. Not like basic bitch questions that everyone's like, well, how much is the salary and stuff like that. One interview that I did a couple of years back for a lead role or a supervisor role, the individual said to me and the other interviewer, it seems like you've both been at this department for a significant amount of time. What's your favorite thing about working here? What's kept you here for this amount of time? And like, and it's
Yeah.
fun, but it also plays on the people, like their pride for the organization.
Yeah.
There's the people's like self-centeredness of wanting to talk about themselves and stuff, like, which is a thing,
Human
obviously.
nature.
But it really stuck with me that she was really interested in like, what does it for you? What ticks for you about being here? And you've been here for such a vast period of time. What is it for you that's doing the job?
Yeah.
Because I want to understand whether that's something for me or I'm going to be like that. So that hits huge for me. I
I
wrote
think the
another.
other side of that is what do you think the biggest challenge will be in this
Yeah,
role?
that's
Like
great.
it's kind of like the highs and lows, but it shows the curiosity of wanting to tackle that. So I just want to highlight that too.
Oh, I think that that's a great question as well. So I think creative in your approach to trying to seek information as well as provide information.
Yeah.
One that sticks out for me, I wrote in my notes was confidence. Like I really need confidence from people, at least a decent amount of confidence. Eye contact, confidence, not cocky, not boastful, because that always rubs wrong for me during interviews. And please, for the love of God, don't bash your current employer. Like it
Oh,
just
so
don't
true.
look good. It's not a good look. Don't bash your current manager or employer or whatever. There's ways to obviously mention certain things and describe certain things without looking bad, or making them look bad. Because if you're going to do that, you're probably going to do that about me in a year or
It's like
so.
when you go out for dinner with new friends and or you meet someone new and they just like bitch about all their friends, you're like, "Uh-oh. If they're bitching about that, they're gonna like turn around and bitch about us right
Are
away,
you
you
doing
know?"
that with your new friends in Arizona, like
No,
talking
no,
shit
no.
about
Yeah.
us or whatever? Like, are you trying to say something here? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all.
No,
Not
how cute
at
is it
all.
that my cup matches my shirt? Just saying for a second, both purple.
It's pretty perfect at my house. I wish I was there with you. Um, you made me think of something though that I want to double click on. So, confidence, because a lot of times people think confidence means like showing up and acting like you have it all together and representing like all the things you can do. And it's like very overt and it's, here's this, let me show you this. And to me, I actually think the nuance to this is it's a quiet confidence that maybe that's a personal thing, but I think it's someone that can represent their value and their future value to you with like a way of articulating how they think, how they've had impact in the past, um, And so it's not like you said, someone coming in and being like, well, I did this and that and da 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 da. It's like, no.
Amazing. Someone like, you come in, you smile at your interviewers. How are you doing? Like, sometimes you have to make small chat. Like, talking and chatting leads to people liking you. So you do have to actually play on the psychology of a lot of this too.
Yep.
And sometimes those biases that will work in your favor as well. So sometimes you have to play on that. But one that I was going to mention, kind of related to it as well, is interviews are like uncomfortable, right? So
Yeah.
like you can be nervous and whatever, but if I'm hiring for a managerial role or like a leadership role, I expect you to be somewhat at ease in this uncomfortable situation, because I'm going to look at that and say, how are you going to be in 6 months to a year in some really uncomfortable people situations, and how are you going to manage that? And I know everyone likes to say, like, not everyone's good at interviews and this and that. If you can't do that with at least a decent amount of confidence and show that you're slightly comfortable in an uncomfortable situation, I will use that as a test to how you're going to be when you get into a specific role, because I've never been tested as much as I have in leadership roles where I've had to get really freaking comfortable with being in a shit situation. So that's always going to resonate for me.
Yeah, I think that's so accurate. And the reason why I just want to like sidebar for a second, but it's hilarious because
What's
I'm still
going
in
on?
Arizona and out the window, there's a spider crawling on my window and I hate spiders. And I'm like,
I'm
fucking
like, what
Arizona.
is she looking at? I was wondering if
It's
it
a
was the
spider
bird
on the right.
flapping. Like, did
Anyways,
I just hear
oh,
that?
sorry. I just had to say it so I couldn't think about it. But to all the listeners, yuck.
Big
But
spider.
back to you because you had so many good points there. It makes me realize that it's not about showing up perfect. It's about self awareness of your strengths. And for example, if you are just like rattled nervous, it's like one, go do some role play around the interview with someone in your village, your friend, family member, your partner, and like practice because it's not going to come natural. So like practice, get better. If you're someone like me, I often get really visceral. Like I get really rosy chest. I got a red face. So I know always wear a high neck shirt because like if I'm interviewing and you just see blotchiness everywhere, you're like,
Really
"Oh
cool.
shoot, like
Like
she's
disease.
nervous."
Yeah.
Yeah. So but like know your tips and tricks of how to be self-aware a of where your strengths and weaknesses are, and b how you show up. If you're someone that like stutters on your words when you're nervous, it's like go into the interview and say, I am nervous. I'm so excited. Sometimes when I get nervous, I like think out loud and say a lot of things. So like bear with me, but I'm going to try and be succinct. Like there's no shame, in my opinion, there's no shame in being aware of what it is and then conquering it. And so yeah, I think that we are going to test you on it. Everything you do, as much as the government, it's a rubric. Everything you do within the process of being selected to come in for an interview, to interviewing, to how you accept the offer letter, that's all being judged and assessed. And
You're right.
so just know that the million little decisions add up. And so you got to really think about it.
And I think that's a good point, the little disclaimer at the beginning. And there's the role of the interview as interviewer as well to help you be a little bit at ease. Like if
Yeah.
you come in and you're obviously nervous, and everyone's going to be nervous, and you say like, I'm nervous, but I'm excited for this. I'm going to try to not go too fast through my answers, because we all tend to speak really quickly when we're speaking publicly or in interviews. Just let me know if you need me to slow down. It would be my job as an interview to smile at that person, give them some eye contact and go, no worries. Like that's totally normal. You
Yeah.
take your time. I'll let you know if anything. And I should also say, I'll be writing notes. So if I'm not looking at you the whole time, just know that I'm listening and I'm taking notes and whatnot. Don't take that as a sign that I'm not engaged with you. I'll try to look up as much as possible, but I want to capture as much of what you're saying to me on paper or in my typing as possible. And then someone goes like, okay, she's not a bitch. Like if I would just
Well,
like
and what you
stone
just
face
said is
like,
so powerful, which is the way you show up, the other human will mimic and show. If you show vulnerability and self awareness, the other person will too. If you show up and you act cocky and you're like, I have it all, I know it all, I'd be excellent, you don't even need to. Of course, you're not going to give the disclaimer that, like, if I'm not making eye contact, I'm taking notes. You're going to jump right in because you're like, okay, here's where we are. Let's go. And so I
know
think
your audience.
self awareness, Key and
No,
explanation. Sorry, I cut you off.
100%. No, I love it. There's just so many things like we could get at in this episode. I'm like, this needs to be like a 3-part episode. But what I was thinking too is like, know your audience. Like, you don't always have the benefit of that. But
Yeah.
when you're applying for a job internally, you may get insight onto who's interviewing you or who might be interviewing you. So exactly what you just said is mimicking kind of the personality, knowing a little bit about that individual is likely going to play up on the way you're going to act during your interview and the emotions of it. Like if I know that my interviewer is super into like hiking and rock climbing and stuff like that, maybe when we're shooting the shit at the beginning, waiting for someone else to start and show up, I might be like, oh, I just took this trip and we were like in Arizona, we hiked up a mountain. Like I would never do that, obviously, but
You know what makes me realize though? This is a fine line between creepy and insightful. And I actually think like walk that line.
you
Like
have to.
there are so many times
You have to play
when
it.
so at Shopify, we would actually, that was one thing we did. We always said who you were going to meet with. So it was like, here's your day. You're going to come in, you're going to meet with Chelsea, you're going to meet with Katie. And like, finally, your final interview of the day is going to be Brittany. And so, like, get ready for that. It is so easy to look up a company and look up that name, would give first and last, and be like, what conversations, what speaking have they done? Have they done any articles? Like, what are their interests? I would look
Yeah.
on Facebook. I look on Instagram. I would
Where
look on
did they
LinkedIn.
last travel to? Like,
Yeah.
and
And
find
people,
similarities.
I would talk to people and they'd be like, so like, what's your role here? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like for you not to have Googled me? No, but like do your research. No matter what role I
Oh
was,
my
it just
God, you're
showed
so right.
a lack of interest and effort. And so it goes back to that first point, but like do your research, figure it out. And then I think, like you just said, have small talk. Like it's not all business. Show yourself and your personality. I think that's so important. People want to like people. And so, like, different ways you can do that is by, talking about your interests, talking about yourself outside of work, bringing
Like,
in examples. When you ask, okay, in a behavioral based question or a situation, it's like, oh, you want to know about how I show up in highly stressful situations? Well, I know this isn't in the work context, but my most stressful situation was actually last year when I was at home in a pandemic with kids. Da, 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 da. And during that, I realized I was able to multitask. I had a schedule and like pull in examples in different areas. Don't just do personal because then it's
yeah,
like,
it doesn't
where did
have to.
that come from?
Yeah, yeah, fair. No, no, you're
Also,
right. So a combination is so important.
yeah, one funny story. So when I interviewed at Shopify, this is back in 2010. I mean, the only social media that there was Facebook, and Facebook was still relatively new. It was like 4 years new. So we had gone out for, I think, me or one of our besties' birthdays, and we did a rock star theme.
Oh
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
my profile picture was me, full like crimped rock star with a blow up
I
guitar,
know.
rocking out. And I was interviewing, and I had like my final interview with the founders at the time. And before I go in, my dad goes, you probably should switch your Facebook profile picture because they probably looked you up and like that's not very professional. And I was like, there's no way that people do that. How naive. So I show up in this interview, and at the end, like we're jiving. So I make a joke about like how my dad said this. And Toby looks at me and he goes, oh, I did look you up. And I really loved that photo. It showed you had personality and spun. And so it played as a positive. If I was interviewing in a very corporate setting that was a lot more mature, I don't think it would have resonated as much. So it helped that the founder was,
Yeah.
turning 30 that year. Like I lucked into it, but
Yeah.
don't luck into it.
If you were starting at a role where it's like all business suits, all
Yeah.
like, formal faces and stuff like that, probably totally different. And I mean, I almost always, like, just so anyone knows, I almost always social media people all the time. If it's a
Yeah.
role specific to like to my teams and stuff, obviously, not just like if I'm hiring or interviewing for a pool of candidates, I don't have time to go and do that. But if it's like I've got 3 candidates, I'm hiring for a specific managerial job on my team, you best believe I'm looking up on Facebook. I'm looking up on Insta. I'm looking up on
100%.
all the platforms. I want to see what your picks are. I want to see how you present yourself and whatnot. I mean, I'm not to say like I'm super innocent, though I have gone on over the years and deleted a couple of different pics, and some of them you can never delete because other people posted
The
them. Like,
internet.
what can you do? We were young at one point. We did silly things. I mean, I'm not doing lines off of a desk or something like
I
that,
hope not.
obviously, but
Jesus.
no, there's none of that. But yeah, that's a really good point, and I always do that. And I want to, I like we're coming up on time, and I feel like there's a million things we could still say here.
Yeah, how do
I
you want
want
to
to
sum it up here?
Okay, no, before I sum it up, I want to say something
Okay.
because it's a point that I need to actually work on
Okay.
in interviews and just like in life when I'm briefing. Clear, concise, not repetitive. For
Mm.
some reason, what I do often is I'm clear and concise, but for some reason, I like to go back and say it again. And I catch myself doing it, but I say it in just like a slightly different way. And I notice other people doing it. I'm like, wow, that's so fucking annoying. But then I'm like, I do that all the time. And I don't know if it's because I like to talk through things out loud. So the first time I say it, it's like my thought. And then the second time I say it, it's like me having really developed it further. But it's something, and sometimes you have to do that when you're thinking on your feet. But I notice that occasionally I'll re say it and I'm like, these people aren't idiots. They don't need me to say it again for them. So, like, it's something I have to work on that
But
is a thing.
I think this is such a good example of what we just talked about is like self-awareness and then vulnerability and expressing it. So I think out loud. And because of that, go down paths and it can almost seem too rambly and so less concise. So one thing I always say is when I'm in situation, I say, I think out loud. Let's just think out loud here. It might be rambly, but we'll get there. And like I just give a little disclaimer. I think for you, it's like sometimes I repeat, like there's a way to say it that
Yeah.
lands and makes it okay instead of annoying. It's when people aren't aware of it and they keep doing it and it's like, okay, what are you trying to do
Like
here?
every
So it's like
question
you're
you're
aware of
being
it now. Yeah, how are you going to sum it up?
So I think that's a perfect, like in terms of a disclaimer, especially when I'm talking to my teams, like that's how I kind of work. We all work through things together. I say something, they're like, well, what about this? What about that? You know, and I love to summarize and repeat. And that's probably
Yeah.
like, it's great in those situations where we're working through a problem together, a situation and how to approach it, next steps. Interviews, I still try, like, I'm going to try to tone it down a little bit more because obviously they're likely way more senior than me and they're like, I don't have time for this shit. Like, you already said that twice. Like, stop it, Chels. But good point about the disclaimer. I think regardless, I added it in both scenarios because you're probably best to just get it out there and mention that that's the case. And I'll be a bit more mindful for it in like those formal types of assessment situations versus when I'm working through something.
And I think no
That
one's
makes
going to be
sense?
perfect in these situations. So no one's expecting perfection. They're expecting the underlying attributes of what you think someone will be successful in a role, attributes and skills. So it's like one, know your skills and know how to explain them and like your experience and your accomplishments, but know how to explain those accomplishments or skills in a way that shows the process to get there. And sometimes repeating different aspects of that is a really good thing. And so like don't be too hard on yourself there and like don't go too extreme the other way that doesn't allow that because I think it is actually good. I always said in the company like you got to repeat yourself 2 to 3 times for people to actually hear it and let it sit. And so like maybe it's a skill that you built up to really like land things and
Maybe.
now you're noticing it in others that do
Maybe
it in a
I think
different way
it's
and it's
annoying, but
annoying.
yeah, maybe I think it's annoying, but it's not annoying for others. I mean, someone
Yeah.
will probably let me know after
As your
this.
bestie, I've never noticed it. Well, I'm just
Oh,
being serious.
oh, that's sweet. Maybe I just more to the point with you guys, but I think I think those are all really good points, and I think that I've just lost my thought on what I was going to say about that. I had a actually really good point, but if we were to summarize this a little bit, what you're saying is be prepared, know yourself, sell yourself. The process is important, not just the end result. So people want to hear about the meat and potatoes in between because that's how you got to that great outcome. For example, know that in relation to the job or the organization that you're applying to. Be presentable, be confident, don't be cocky, don't swear, use slang, or badmouth your ex or current employer. That's a no no. Have a great attitude. Let your enthusiasm shine through because that's what's going to give you the edge during an interview.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think? Have I missed anything?
I just think merging the personal and professional. I
I
think
love
like,
it.
and maybe that's your last point, but like very specifically building in together. And I think you said know yourself, know thy organization, do your research.
So Macbeth, know thy organization. I love it. It's so good.
It's true.
Um,
I
I
think
think
that's
this
it. I
is,
think that's a great step one of kind of interviewing how to show up. And we'll come back to this because there's so much to cover.
I think so much to cover, private versus public. And I think at some point we'll need to go back because we've kind of gone out of order, but this was just such a relevant topic right now. I think we'll need to go back, even like how to apply, CVs, like how to even get to that interview process and what comes after the interview. Also,
Yeah, then you
some
got to show
people,
up.
what I really enjoy with interviews, and I want to just say it really quickly, follow ups after. I like follow ups from candidates. And the other thing that I like
Oh,
is
you just made me think of one thing I want to interject with.
say it.
One of my favorite things when interviewing someone was in the interview, they answered a question really poorly. And they sent a follow up that said, okay, like I'm a processor. I need to think through things, but I also will never let things go. And so, like, I wanted to follow up and add more context. And it wasn't something they could just go home and Google and then send in an
Right.
answer. It was like a very personal representation. And so they gave all their thoughts, and I could read it and understand where they're coming from, in addition to now knowing like they're not great on the spot, which is okay. They need a click to think through it, but the fact that they put the effort to follow up, to like share it all, oh, I loved it. So it's like a follow up, but also a follow up with clarity and like an extra ad bit and a little Easter egg. Ooh la
Does
la.
that does that impact their assessment, like from
Yeah,
you? Okay.
yeah.
So that's super cool. Like obviously couldn't do that in the public. But what people can do, and that what they what they should always do, if you don't pass an interview, like you get your results back and you've hit 2 out of 5, and overall you haven't passed the interview, you should always ask for an informal discussion with the interview panel. You
Oh,
have the
that's what
right,
yeah.
yeah, you have the right to ask for an informal discussion. It's not going to change the interviewer's assessment of you, unless like something was done so drastically wrong and there's a massive flaw. But very, very rare. But it's an opportunity for you to ask, how could I have answered differently? How could, like, I only got a 2 out of 5 on my communication skills. Can you give me any tips or tricks on how best to tackle this in my next interviews? Was there something I was missing in terms of that question number one where I only got 3 out of 5? Like, are there particular answers that I like may have overlooked that should have been included? You have that option. You should always ask for an informal interview, and the interview panel will always take the time to do that. That is your right. It doesn't mean your
In the
your result
private,
is going to
that's a
change.
no go.
Yeah. So in the public, that's a thing. It
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
mean don't go into an informal though thinking, oh, I'm going from a fail to a pass. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but adjust your expectations. Your informal is your opportunity to learn and
yeah.
to approach these things in the future. It's not for you to get your mark changed.
Well, also to make a good impression potentially with people that could come full circle.
I
So I
remember
think,
people all the time, like
yeah,
from informal discussions, and sometimes I go, I know someone else who's hiring that you might actually be a great fit for, and I
yeah,
forward them to someone else. Like it's always a good idea.
yeah. If people tried to do that in the private, like a bunch of people, there wouldn't be the time. Like I would give feedback. If someone asked, like, hey, do you have any feedback on why I didn't specifically this? I would always give that. But if someone wanted to like set up an interview to go through it, I would be like, sorry, no, that's
That's
just
not
not worth the
that's
time.
not happening. Yeah, we have to follow certain protocols
Yeah.
and procedures that, ensure fairness and
So much
transparency.
of
Not that
the
Shopify
government
doesn't.
is like knowing the process and leveraging
You
the
have to.
process.
Have to understand the process to
Yeah.
master the process. It can take years, but if you figure it out early, you will have very fruitful interviews and selection boards where you're successful, because sometimes people's downfall is just not understanding how they need to
Totally.
study, in what they need to study, how they need to show up, how they need to approach things. And once you master that, you're key to success.
Yeah. Love that. Okay, we're at like 45. So
Oh
I
God.
think we wine it up.
Let's wine and dine. Hi there. Here we are at wine time. Just having a good old long sip, or a slight chug, if you may.
What wine are you drinking today there, Chels?
It's a good question. Well, we can tell already it's a rosé. Let me get a quick sip in again
It's a
before.
tasty one.
Mm. Okay, here's what I have for us today. Guess what? I've brought a wine celebrity.
Which one is it today?
It's Sarah Jessica Parker with Invivo. I think Invivo, yes. Yeah, I saw this one at the LCBO the other day. It's a Sud de France Rosé,
Hmm.
2021. So this is a new vintage. It's a fairly
I
new
didn't
vintage.
even honestly know that she had a wine. It's like,
I I had no idea either. It's a new one by the old SJP. So I was
yeah,
like,
love
hey,
it.
if we're talking wine celebrity, this is whom I brought to the table. Let me give you a quick rundown on this. It's a premium South of France rosé, crafted in collaboration with a family estate from
Ooh.
Provence. Okay. So I guess it's a collaboration between Sarah Jessica Parker and Invivo, which must be that family. Final blend
Essentially,
was,
she slapped her name on it.
yeah. Well, hold on. It says here the final blend was selected by Sarah Jessica. Okay,
Hmm.
so she had a say in it apparently, and Invivo over an afternoon of tasting. Oh, the imagery that they're producing with that. It's beautiful. The result aromas of summer berries and rose petals. A full bodied wine with great complexity and elegance. Um, so, really interesting though. It says produced for Invivo, obviously, which is that south of France, that Provence family, but in New Zealand. Okay, so fine.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Anyways,
A
so
little
this is
complexity to it.
very complex. So like, don't read the fine print, obviously, if you want to be disappointed. No, just kidding. So this was like about a $20 bottle of wine. It was like somewhere between 19 and 20. And I kind of just random passed it in the LCBO in the chilled section because I always like to check the chilled section if I'm drinking that night or whatever. I wasn't, obviously. I saved it for today. The wine is nice. I mean, it's a light
It's good.
rosé. It's not very sweet, which is great. It claims to be full bodied, which is the case. It kind of has a bit of a, a sharpness to it, which I like a little bit as well. And I feel like you could have a couple of glasses of this and
Couple
not feel like
bottles.
absolute shit. You know what I mean? For the price point, I mean, it's like, I mean, it's not one of your cheapo, like Safeway wines, but if you want to have a wine celebrity, that's an
I feel
option.
like it's a good one to bring to a party too. Like I feel like if you're like, yeah, Sarah Jessica Parker, people would be like, cool.
Yeah, it's like we had said, like, who did you bring tonight? Well, I brought Wayne Gretzky. It's like, well, obviously you spent more money because you got a wine celebrity on there. So here we are, obviously,
Here
with a
we
wine
are.
celeb.
And then ranking 1 to 10.
I give it an 8. I give it
Hmm.
an 8. It ranks high enough on my scale, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
concur.
So that's our wine for today. But yeah,
How's life?
how's life? Life's fine. Like I said, life's fine. I'm coming down off of my high of being on my trips and whatnot, and back to reality. Very busy at work, very busy with family, um, kids, husband, and I owe my husband several credits, like he likes to say, because he was here for 10
Are
days.
credits?
Yep.
What are credits? Is that
Well,
a
so
PG version of rated
oh
R?
God, I guess you could put it in so many ways. So funny enough, his friend, and I won't name names, it's your sister's husband, asked Gary how many credits he had from having the kids for 10 days while I was out gallivanting in California and Arizona. And so Gary mentioned to me, like, so what's my credit situation? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? He's like,
Yeah, you're a
credit.
parent.
Yeah,
It's
credits
part of
that
the
I
job.
built up from that trip. And I'm like, oh, credits. Okay, well, so I've been extra nice lately. So that's like a half credit. Like that's like a half credit from the norm. Promoting him to go out and take some time to himself. He's come to your house once or twice, come down the range for a couple hours, gone done some nights out. There might be some fun credits in there as well. Like, but I have a couple of credits I need to burn off for him to make up for my amount of time being away and being able to like gallivant and whatnot. So we're
Yeah.
working
It's
off the
hard
credit
being a solo parent.
situation.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So, anyways, but pretty much just that coming off of my high of trips and then But then, like you, the other day, you're like, "Oh, there might be a trip in September." I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if I could manage that one."
I
Like,
know.
I'm
I
like,
know.
"Okay, let's
We'll
see what the
see.
dates are.
We'll see.
We'll
All the
see."
trips, all the adventures. Yeah, no, I'm good too. I have my parents here still. They're leaving today, and then Scott's parents come in. So lots of visits. And we had you right before that. We ended up booking a solid month back to back.
So crazy.
Would I do that again? No. But have I enjoyed all the moments? Yes. So it's more so just like finding your pockets to recharge. It's just like a lot. And I host hard. Like I'm not like, oh, just show up and like it'll be fine, figure it out for yourself. I'm like, what do you want to do at every moment? And how can I make this
I
amazing?
know. It's a lot. Hosting is difficult. Like it's draining.
Yeah.
Even when
It is.
it's your family, because and you're so close, you still feel like you need to make the most of the time for them. I
Yeah.
mean, you started off with me, so we got in a lot of fun things, which I really, really appreciate that you did. And then we had afternoons or mornings where we did fuck all for like three or
Yeah.
4 hours straight, and we just watched Bravo, and we got into random deep conversations, either over drinks or just sober, which was fun
Yeah.
too. Um, and just did nothing. And then we're like, oh, okay, I guess we should go get dressed right now. You can't have that level of comfort with everyone where you're just like, yeah, whatever. Although I'm sure you felt expectation of me being like, make some fun things for me, Brent.
I put it on myself. I've been working with my therapist on it, but I put it on myself. I just want every moment to be captured. And so I need to ease into it a little bit more and just be like, it is a joint effort. Like we're gonna make this great. We're here to
100%.
visit and like have that comfort.
It is an emotional, like psychological burden because, like, you've done it back to back and you're about to go into your third consecutive visit of folks, friends, family there. So you feel like you need to book events and like, okay,
Yeah.
we're going to golf this day. And okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do everything together. And like, then you also feel guilty if you want to just be by yourself for a certain period
Yeah.
of time and sit in your room. And then there's people in the living room. You're like, oh, what do I do with them? Like they want to watch TV together. I'm like, no, I don't always want to watch TV together. I want to watch TV by myself,
Yeah.
you know?
Nuanced,
You know what
but
I
it's
like
been
cracked
good.
up when I was visiting there, and then we were both like, "Oh, should we like sit and watch TV in the living room?" And then we're both just like, "No, like let's just
We
go."
want to separate. I'll see you tomorrow morning. We're going to our own bedrooms.
It's 9:45, so I'm gonna go to bed. Yeah, I'm gonna watch Bravo in my room, and then I'm gonna pass out, and we'll see you, in about 9 hours.
Yep. Yep. We
Like
need a
no
little
shit
break.
skipping.
Oh, it's good. Driving me to drink more too, but it's been fine. But with that, let's wrap it because I feel like there's a long one. See you again soon. Adore you.
Okay, okay, shut down like that. Great. Okay, see you again soon. Love you and enjoying the SJP, everyone. Go buy a
Yum
bottle
yum.
from LCBO.